Since the dawn of civilization, humanity has always been driven by an irresistible blend of curiosity and fear in the face of what it does not understand. Among ancient ruins, hidden scrolls, and symbols carved into millennia-old stones, stories began to emerge about groups that operated in the shadows, far from the eyes of the common people, deciding the fate of empires and charting courses that would shape the future of millions. These groups, known today as secret societies, are described as collectives of individuals with influence, power, and knowledge unavailable to the ordinary citizen. The mystery surrounding their existence lies not only in what is said about them, but also in what is never fully revealed. It is as if every fragment of information found were merely a piece of a far greater puzzle, one that, even incomplete, already reveals disturbing shapes. The public fascination with these societies did not arise by chance. It was fueled over the centuries by rumors, accusations, legends, and, more recently, by popular culture. Books, films, and documentaries have turned the Illuminati, the Freemasons, and other similar groups into modern icons of mystery and conspiracy. Yet behind this cinematic image lie deeper and more complex layers, where reality and fiction are so intricately intertwined that it is often impossible to distinguish one from the other. This blend in itself is already a powerful weapon. The murkier the truth, the more fertile the ground for theories, speculations, and diverging interpretations. The term secret society carries a symbolic weight. It evokes images of midnight meetings in halls lit only by candles, men and women dressed in ceremonial robes, performing enigmatic rituals and discussing plans that would never reach public knowledge. But the reality can be even more intriguing. In many cases, these gatherings do not take place in remote or isolated locations, but in the heart of bustling capitals, behind doors that blend into the common architecture, invisible to hurried passers-by. The secrecy, therefore, lies not only in the location, but in the way they camouflage themselves in everyday life. This cloak of invisibility is upheld by two fundamental pillars: discretion and hierarchy. One does not simply stumble into the core of a secret society. One must be invited, tested, and often required to swear oaths of loyalty that bind the member to the group for life. These initiation rituals vary from order to order, but almost all carry symbolism that traces back to ancient traditions, with roots in religious, military, or mystical practices. And each of these symbols is loaded with hidden meanings, functioning as an internal language understood only by the initiated. But why do these societies inspire such fear and fascination? The answer may lie in the impact they are believed to have on the course of history. The most popular theories claim that these groups influence high-level political decisions, control global economic flows, and even manipulate crises to gain strategic advantage. In other words, that they form a kind of parallel government, invisible yet omnipresent. The sense that there is a hidden mechanism silently moving the structures of power fuels the idea that, behind elected leaders, there are far older and more resilient forces pulling the strings. This introduction to the universe of secret societies does not yet seek to prove or disprove any theory. The goal is to grasp the atmosphere surrounding the subject, to feel the symbolic weight of these organizations, and to understand how, even in the 21st century, we still live under the shadow of forces that, real or not, continue to stir the collective imagination. For in the world of secret societies, mystery is not merely a detail. It is the very essence of their existence. The name Illuminati has become synonymous with global conspiracy, but to understand its true essence, one must return to the 18th century, more precisely to the year 1776, when a man named Adam Weishaupt, professor of canon law at the University of Ingolstadt in Bavaria, decided to create an order that would unite Enlightenment rationalism with a project for social transformation. Europe at that time was in the midst of intellectual upheaval. The Enlightenment challenged the dogmas of the Church and questioned monarchical absolutism, proposing a world governed by reason, science, and individual freedom. It was in this context that Weishaupt conceived the Illuminati as a brotherhood intended to free humanity from political and religious oppression, promoting education and critical thinking. The order, initially called the Perfectibilists, gathered only a few members at first, but quickly grew and spread, partly thanks to infiltration into other influential organizations such as Freemasonry. The expansion method was shrewd. Rather than creating an entirely independent and visible movement, Weishaupt and his allies preferred to operate within already established institutions, absorbing their members and resources. This strategy made the order practically invisible to the public, yet extremely effective in strengthening its network of influence. The structure of the Illuminati was hierarchical and compartmentalized. Members were classified into degrees, each with limited access to the order's information, so that only a select circle knew the complete objectives. At the most basic level, an initiate might think they were participating in a harmless philosophical group, without realizing that at higher levels, complex strategies to shape governments and societies were being discussed. The initiation rituals, adapted from Masonic and Rosicrucian traditions, carried symbolism designed to reinforce commitment to the cause and absolute loyalty to the group. However, rapid success brought unwanted attention. Bavarian authorities, fearing that the Illuminati were undermining political and religious order, launched an investigation. In 1784, the Bavarian government officially banned the order, seized documents, and arrested members. The records obtained revealed correspondence and plans that, to critics, confirmed the Illuminati's intention to interfere in state affairs. But to the order's defenders, these documents were merely proof of a legitimate desire to reform society against the injustices of the time. Despite the supposed dissolution, many believe the Illuminati did not disappear, but instead went underground. Theories claim that they dispersed throughout Europe and America, infiltrating Masonic lodges, intellectual circles, and even the nascent political system of the United States. The use of symbols such as the unfinished pyramid and the all-seeing eye on the Great Seal of the United States is often cited as evidence of this hidden presence. While traditional historians explain such symbols as common allegories of the time, conspiracy theorists see them as deliberate marks meant to indicate that the order survived and thrived. Thus, the official history of the Illuminati is short, but the myth that emerged from it is virtually eternal. The transformation from an 18th century reformist group into the central figure of theories about global control is the result of a blend of historical facts, biased interpretations, and an insatiable public appetite for narratives in which real power is exercised far from everyone's sight. Whether the Illuminati truly continue to exist, operating in the shadows, remains a mystery that has persisted for more than 2 centuries, and one that still fuels debates, suspicions, and investigations today. To understand the ideological and symbolic foundation of the Illuminati, one must delve into the intellectual and mystical currents that shaped their thinking. In the 18th century, the Western world was undergoing a profound cultural transition. Enlightenment philosophy questioned the absolute authority of the church and monarchies, advocating the use of reason, science, and free thought as the driving forces of social evolution. Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the order, was deeply influenced by this movement, absorbing ideas from thinkers such as Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu. These authors argued that knowledge was the key to freeing humanity from ignorance and tyranny, and that education should be the instrument of political and moral transformation. However, the identity of the Illuminati was not formed solely from rationalism. At the same time, there was significant influence from European occultist traditions. Symbolic and structural elements were inherited from older esoteric orders, such as the Rosicrucians, who preached the existence of a secret knowledge capable of revealing spiritual truths hidden from most people. The belief that certain teachings should be reserved for a restricted circle of initiates to prevent them from being misinterpreted or misused was at the core of these societies. Another fundamental pillar was Freemasonry, which already possessed an international network and a well-defined ritualistic structure. Many scholars claim that Weishaupt adapted Masonic symbols and degrees for the Illuminati, incorporating the idea of a hierarchical progression of knowledge. Thus, a new member did not have immediate access to the deepest secrets of the order. They had to prove loyalty, discipline, and understanding to advance step by step. This method, in addition to protecting the organization from infiltration, created a sense of exclusivity and belonging that was nearly unbreakable. The symbols also carried meanings drawn from ancient mysticism. The all-seeing eye, for instance, was not an invention of the Illuminati, but dates back to ancient Egypt and the idea of a divine vision that sees all. The pyramid, likewise, is a symbol of structure and spiritual ascension. For the order, these elements represented both constant vigilance over the world and the pursuit of the moral and intellectual elevation of its members. Beyond philosophical and esoteric influences, there was also a component of political pragmatism. The Illuminati studied strategies of power, inspired by works such as The Art of War by Sun Tzu and Machiavelli's treatises, applying concepts of manipulation, diplomacy, and infiltration to gain advantage without engaging in direct confrontations. This fusion of Enlightenment reason, occult symbolism, and political calculation created a unique system of thought capable of operating simultaneously in the realm of ideas and in practical action. For this reason, the Illuminati became an organization that inspired both fascination and fear. For some, they were visionaries seeking to build a fairer world. For others, masters of manipulation, ready to shape the destiny of nations according to their own agenda. And it is precisely in this duality, between idealism and control, that lies the mystery that still surrounds their legacy today. When speaking about the Illuminati, it is impossible to ignore their complex and often murky relationship with Freemasonry. Both organizations share structural, symbolic, and even early declared goals, which leads many to believe that there was, and perhaps still is, a direct connection between the two. However, the nature of this relationship has always been the subject of debate. Were they allies operating together, or rivals competing for influence over the machinery of global power? Freemasonry, with roots tracing back to the medieval stonemasons' guilds, evolved over the centuries into a philosophical fraternity dedicated to the moral, intellectual, and philanthropic development of its members. Its international network and hierarchical degree system, combined with a rich symbolism, created fertile ground for Adam Weishaupt to see in it an ideal vehicle for the expansion of the Illuminati. The logic was simple: infiltrate an already established organization with thousands of influential members and gradually shape its agenda according to Illuminist objectives. Historical records indeed indicate that around 1777, Weishaupt formally joined Freemasonry. Within Masonic lodges, he not only recruited new members for his order, but also adapted rituals and symbols for the Illuminati. This overlap of identities generated deliberate confusion. For many Masons of the time, the presence of the Illuminati was not obvious, as both groups shared ideas about freedom of thought, social reform, and opposition to tyranny. However, this closeness was not without conflict. Some Masonic leaders began to suspect that Weishaupt's influence threatened Freemasonry's autonomy. The fear was that the Illuminati, with their rigid discipline and bolder political objectives, were turning Masonic lodges into mere instruments for their own purposes. This internal tension led to expulsions, denunciations, and the fragmentation of alliances that had once seemed solid. From a symbolic perspective, the similarities are undeniable. The use of the compass, square, pyramid, and other geometric icons is common to both orders. But while in Freemasonry, these elements represent moral virtues and universal principles, in the Illuminati, they gained an extra layer of meaning, often linked to vigilance, the hierarchy of knowledge and strategic control. For conspiracy theorists, the alliance between Freemasonry and the Illuminati was never completely broken. They believe that after the official dissolution of the Illuminati by Bavaria, many members simply disguised themselves within Masonic lodges, keeping the original ideas and network of contacts alive. For more skeptical historians, however, this connection is exaggerated, the result of overlapping symbols and humanity's tendency to associate secret groups as if they were part of a single global entity. The fact remains that, real or not, the supposed fusion between Freemasonry and the Illuminati has become one of the pillars of modern conspiracy narratives. It fuels the belief that behind major political, economic, and social events, there exists a web of influences that has been interwoven for centuries, invisible to the common eye but perceptible to those who dedicate themselves to reading between the lines of history. When speaking of the Illuminati and Freemasonry, it is easy to imagine that they are unique in the world of secret societies. However, history reveals a constellation of organizations, each with its own origins, symbols, and objectives, but which in many cases intersect in influence and ideology. Some of these orders date back centuries, linked to religious, military, or academic traditions. Others were born more recently, adapting to modern structures of power. All, however, share a common element: secrecy as a tool for survival and dominance. Among the most frequently mentioned is the Order of the Knights Templar, officially founded in the early 12th century to protect Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land. Over time, the Templars amassed immense wealth, political influence, and connections with monarchs and popes. Their sudden dissolution in 1312, ordered by Pope Clement V, under pressure from King Philip IV of France, gave rise to theories that part of the order survived in secrecy, spreading its rituals and treasures to different parts of Europe. Some scholars and conspiracy theorists claim that the Templars were direct forerunners of Freemasonry and consequently of the Illuminati. Another group shrouded in mystery is the Priory of Sion, whose story was popularized by works such as the Da Vinci Code. Although many consider the Priory a modern literary creation, theories point to a secret lineage linked to the protection of supposed descendants of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene, as well as religious secrets capable of shaking the structures of the Catholic Church. In the United States, societies such as Skull and Bones, founded in 1832 at Yale University, have become symbols of academic and political elitism. Its members, known as Bonesmen, include former presidents, Supreme Court justices, and executives of major corporations. The Order's meetings and rituals remain closed to the public, fueling suspicions that strategic decisions of national and global significance are made during their gatherings. Another example is the Bohemian Grove, an annual retreat in California, where political leaders, businessmen, and artists gather for events that combine artistic performances, lectures, and symbolic rituals in front of a huge owl statue. Although its organizers claim that the gathering is merely a private social event, clandestine footage taken by infiltrated journalists has shown curious ceremonies, such as the so-called cremation of care, interpreted by some as a rite of releasing moral responsibilities to facilitate high-impact political and economic decisions. In the realm of occultism, orders such as the Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO, have gained notoriety for adopting mystical practices and sexual rituals as part of their philosophy. Linked to controversial figures like Aleister Crowley, the OTO combines esoteric teachings with elements of ceremonial magic and is seen by some as a modern extension of much older traditions. Although each of these societies has its own official and internal narratives, the conspiracist imagination often connects them into a web of alliances and rivalries. The idea is that all, to a greater or lesser extent, seek to shape the future of the world from the shadows, using methods that range from political strategies to cultural and spiritual influence. And for those who believe in this hidden network, the Illuminati would be only the most visible, or rather the most famous and face of an invisible empire that spans centuries and continents. If there is one element that unites virtually all theories about the Illuminati and secret societies, it is the belief that these groups form a global network of power. This network would not be limited to one country, continent, or sphere of influence. It would operate on multiple levels, interconnecting political leaders, billionaire families, financial institutions, multinational corporations, and even religious organizations. For defenders of this theory, the governments we know would be nothing more than a facade, while the real decisions about the future of the planet would be made in discreet meetings, far from public reach and without any form of accountability. The logic of this network is simple and efficient. Concentrate power in the hands of a few, but do so in such a fragmented and compartmentalized way that no outsider can perceive the full extent of the control. One member of this elite might be an influential business person dictating market trends, while another is a politician shaping laws favorable to the group's interests. A third could be a media mogul responsible for defining narratives that shape public opinion. Separately, they appear to be merely successful individuals. Together, they form an invisible machine that moves economies, determines wars, and sets global agendas. One of the most frequently cited concepts in this context is that of the shadow government, or deep state. It represents the idea that there is a core of power that survives changes in leaders and political parties, operating as a parallel state capable of influencing any strategic decision. This structure would include not only members of secret societies, but also high-ranking military officers, spies, diplomats, and executives who share long-term objectives, regardless of apparent political ideologies. Conspiracy theorists also point to the interconnection of financial elites. Historic families such as the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, as well as groups like the Bank for International Settlements, BIS, and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, are frequently cited as key vertices of this network. By controlling central banks, credit flows, and economic policies, these actors would have the ability to create or resolve crises according to their interests, shaping the fate of entire nations. Another essential component of this alleged network is information manipulation. By controlling media conglomerates, digital platforms, and social networks, it would be possible to steer debates, silence dissenting voices, and create artificial consensus. The logic is simple. Those who control the narrative control perception, and those who control perception control political and social reality. This global power network, according to those who believe in it, does not operate chaotically. On the contrary, there would be a meticulously planned agenda, with objectives ranging from the unification of markets to the creation of a centralized world government, what many call the New World Order. To achieve this goal, the strategy would involve controlled crises, technological advances with dual applications, civil and military, and above all, a gradual process of reducing national sovereignty in favor of international bodies. Whether all of this is reality or merely the result of amplified interpretations is something that deeply divides historians, journalists, and independent researchers. But for those who believe in the existence of this network, there is no doubt. Visible power is only the tip of a colossal iceberg, whose true mass remains submerged in the depths of secrecy. In any investigation into secret societies, one of the most intriguing elements is the use of symbols. For some, they are nothing more than artistic expressions or cultural coincidences. For others, they function as a hidden language, capable of conveying messages and indicating the presence or influence of certain groups. In the case of the Illuminati and similar societies, symbolism is not only part of their identity, but also a strategic tool to mark territory and communicate discreetly among initiates. The most well-known example is the all-seeing eye, often depicted within or above an unfinished pyramid. This symbol, which appears on the Great Seal of the United States and on dollar bills, is interpreted in different ways. Officially, it represents divine providence and constant vigilance, but for conspiracy theorists, it is a mark left by the Illuminati to signal their presence in the nation's founding and their ongoing control over its institutions. The pyramid, with its wide base and narrow apex, would symbolize the hierarchical structure of power, where a few at the top govern the many. Another recurring element is the use of symbolic numbers, such as 13, 33, and 666. The number 13, for instance, is present in various details of the Great Seal of the US. 13 stars, 13 arrows, 13 olive leaves, 13 stripes on the shield. For critics, this is simply a reference to the original 13 colonies. For conspiracy theorists, it is a numerical code with hidden meanings associated with esoteric rituals and traditions. The number 33 is often linked to Freemasonry, representing the highest degree of initiation, while 666, historically associated with the number of the beast in the Book of Revelation, is seen as a symbol of dark dominion. Gestures and body postures are also pointed to as forms of communication. Celebrities, politicians, and business leaders are often photographed making hand signs which, according to conspiracy theorists, allude to hidden symbols, such as the horn sign or the triangle made with fingers. These gestures, when performed at public events or during media appearances, would be visual codes to indicate loyalty or affiliation with a particular society. The presence of these symbols in pop culture is another central point. Music videos, films, album covers, and even advertising campaigns are analyzed frame by frame by those seeking evidence of hidden messages. A famous example is the recurring use of a single isolated eye in musical productions and fashion editorials, which many interpret as a direct reference to the all-seeing eye. Scenes of rituals, references to pyramids, specific color combinations, such as the intense use of black, gold, and red, and the insertion of coded phrases are cited as subtle ways of normalizing or promoting the Illuminati aesthetic to the general public. According to those who support this interpretation, the goal of inserting symbols ostentatiously yet disguised is twofold: to reinforce the group's internal identity and, at the same time, to condition the public to passively accept its presence. Thus, each symbolic appearance becomes a silent reminder that hidden power not only exists but manifests constantly before our eyes, often without us consciously realizing it. The debate over these symbols is intense. Skeptics argue that most of these associations are the result of pareidolia, the human tendency to find patterns and meaning in random elements. For those who believe in the theories, however, the systematic and global repetition of these signs cannot be mere coincidence. It is an invisible signature, spread by those who know the secret language of power. Few expressions carry as much weight in conspiracy theories as New World Order. For some, it is merely a geopolitical concept used by leaders to describe changes in the international order. For others, it is the materialization of an ancient and meticulously crafted plan by secret societies to establish a single, centralized, global government. This vision suggests that national borders, cultural differences, and even political systems would gradually be dissolved in favor of a supranational structure controlled by a select elite. The origin of the expression dates back to different historical moments, but it gained prominence in the 20th century, especially after speeches by figures such as Woodrow Wilson, Winston Churchill, and George H.W. Bush. For the general public, New World Order meant a reorganization of the global landscape after major conflicts such as the First and Second World Wars or the Cold War. But for those who believe in the existence of a secret plan, these pronouncements were veiled messages, signaling progress in the implementation of a project that has been in the making for centuries. According to this theory, the New World Order would not emerge abruptly, but through a slow, strategic, and almost imperceptible process. The first step would be to create economic interdependence among nations, making them vulnerable to coordinated financial crises. The second would be to expand the reach of international organizations, such as the UN, the IMF, and the World Bank, until they acquired real authority over national legislation. The third would be to use global crises, wars, pandemics, economic collapses, as justification for emergency measures that, in reality, strip away individual freedoms and strengthen centralized control. In this context, the Illuminati and other secret societies would act as the strategic core, setting directives that world leaders merely execute. The alleged presence of these groups at exclusive meetings, such as the Bilderberg Group, is cited as evidence that crucial decisions are not made in parliaments or congresses, but in closed rooms, with no public record and access restricted to a chosen few. Symbols would also play a fundamental role in the NWO. Phrases like Novus Ordo Seclorum, New Order of the Ages, inscribed on the Great Seal of the United States, are pointed to as proof that the idea of a world government was encoded as early as the 18th century. Furthermore, the repetition of certain concepts in political speeches, such as global governance and collective security, would be part of a psychological conditioning process to make the population accept the transition as something inevitable and beneficial. Critics of these theories argue that the concept of the New World Order is greatly exaggerated, mixing historical facts with distorted interpretations. However, for believers, each step toward the centralization of global power is another piece fitting into the puzzle. And according to them, the ultimate goal is clear: a system in which laws, currencies, armies, and information are under the command of a single authority, eliminating the autonomy of peoples and consolidating the dominance of an invisible elite. Thus, the New World Order remains one of the central points in conspiratorial discussions, not only as a theory, but as a constant warning that the future of humanity may be shaped in the shadows, long before any decision reaches public knowledge. If military force and economic power are traditional tools of domination, cultural and psychological control represents an even more effective and often invisible weapon. This form of influence requires no tanks in the streets or authoritarian decrees. It operates in the realm of ideas, shaping values, beliefs, and behaviors so subtly that the very victims rarely realize they are being conditioned. In the universe of theories about the Illuminati and other secret societies, this mechanism is described as one of the most important pillars of their power. The basic principle is simple. Controlling the narrative means controlling perception, and controlling perception is the same as controlling reality. Popular culture, education, the press, and entertainment would be the main channels for this type of manipulation. Books, films, music, and TV series, for example, can be used to introduce concepts, normalize ideas, and create emotional associations that guide collective thinking. When the same symbol, phrase, or theme is repeated endlessly, it becomes part of the collective imagination, influencing behaviors and opinions without the need to impose anything explicitly. In music, for decades there have been accusations about the use of subliminal messages, double-meaning lyrics, and music videos filled with hidden symbolism. The allegation is that high-profile artists, whether willingly or not, are used as cultural ambassadors for specific agendas. The same logic applies to cinema, which through carefully crafted narratives can shape how the public perceives topics such as wars, politics, religion, and even the very idea of a world government. In the field of education, theories suggest that school curricula can be adjusted to prioritize certain worldviews and omit others. By controlling what is taught and how it is taught, it is possible to shape entire generations aligned with specific ideologies. This standardization of thought would make it easier to accept social and political changes that might otherwise encounter resistance. The media, in turn, is considered the most powerful tool in this process. By selecting which stories to tell, how to tell them, and which details to highlight or omit, media outlets can create a filtered reality. This is reinforced by the constant repetition of certain narratives, which end up being accepted as absolute truths. The existence of media conglomerates, controlling much of the information circulating worldwide, is often cited as evidence of this strategy. In addition, there is the psychological aspect of mass manipulation. Techniques based on studies of human behavior, such as Pavlovian conditioning, social engineering, and the use of emotional triggers, would be applied to induce predictable responses. Fear, for example, is a recurring resource. Economic crises, terrorist threats, and health emergencies can be amplified to generate panic, leading people to accept restrictive measures in the name of security. Critics of these theories argue that such influences are the result of commercial interests and market dynamics, not of a centralized plan. But for those who believe, the coordination between different sectors, entertainment, media, education, and politics, is too evident to ignore. In the end, cultural and psychological control not only shapes opinions, but redefines the very notion of freedom, making it compatible with the limits imposed by those who hold true power. Throughout history, decisive moments have shaped the destiny of nations and, by extension, all of humanity. Wars, economic crises, revolutions, political assassinations, and profound cultural shifts do not arise in a vacuum. They are often preceded by a chain of carefully orchestrated events. Within the theories surrounding the Illuminati and secret societies, there is the belief that these major events are rarely the result of chance, but rather of deliberate manipulation to serve specific agendas. A frequently cited example is the outbreak of major wars. The First World War, for instance, is seen not only as the result of nationalist tensions and military alliances, but also of the financial and geopolitical interests of elites who would profit from Europe's reconstruction and the redrawing of its borders. The Second World War, in certain narratives, is viewed as a continuation of this process, enabling the emergence of superpowers and the creation of international organizations such as the United Nations, supposedly essential steps toward the advancement of a system of global governance. Political assassinations also play a central role in these theories. The deaths of figures such as Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., and other charismatic leaders are interpreted as the result of coordinated operations to remove obstacles to certain agendas. In all these cases, a pattern is suggested. The official investigation never answers all the questions, leaving gaps that fuel suspicion. For believers, these gaps are not accidental oversights, but carefully planned omissions to conceal the true masterminds. Global economic crises, such as the Great Depression of 1929 or the financial crisis of 2008, are also viewed through this lens. The theory holds that by provoking or amplifying financial collapses, it becomes possible to concentrate even more wealth and power in the hands of a few. The logic is relentless. While millions lose their jobs, homes, and savings, financial conglomerates and strategic investors acquire assets at rock-bottom prices, expanding their influence. Popular revolutions, although genuine in many cases, are also interpreted as possible guided revolutions, in which external agents finance, train, and direct movements to ensure that, at the end of the process, the new government aligns with global interests. This strategy would allow for radical changes without losing real control over power. Beyond political and economic events, there are also disasters and tragedies that enter the radar of these theories. Large-scale fires, blackouts, terrorist attacks, and even natural disasters are sometimes interpreted as having less natural origins than they appear. This includes accusations of using climate and energy manipulation technologies to create conditions that justify emergency measures, favoring the implementation of specific policies. Skeptics claim that this view results from a human tendency to seek patterns and culprits in complex, multifactorial events. However, for those who believe in historical manipulation, the coincidences, the repeated appearance of beneficiaries, and the constant expansion of powers after each crisis are sufficient evidence that nothing truly significant happens without, at some level, being aligned with a script written by invisible hands. In any theory about global control, the financial elite occupies a central place. The logic is straightforward. Whoever controls the flow of money controls decisions, governments, and ultimately the lives of billions of people. In narratives involving the Illuminati and other secret societies, this elite is not composed solely of extremely wealthy individuals, but of dynasties and institutions that span generations, shaping the global economy according to their own interests. Families such as the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, and others are often identified as key vertices of this network. They are attributed not only with the control of banks and investments, but also with direct influence over monetary policies, international loans, and even decisions of war and peace. Historically, these families have been linked to financing governments during times of war, ensuring astronomical profits regardless of which side emerged victorious. This role as banker of nations has reinforced the perception that their power transcends borders and ideologies. One of the central instruments of this control would be the central banking system. While many believe that institutions such as the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and other similar bodies are state entities, in reality, they operate independently, often with little transparency and significant private influence. According to conspiracy theories, this independence is no accident. It allows crucial decisions on interest rates, money issuance, and credit policies to be made without direct consultation with the public, favoring specific interests of the elite. Another frequently raised point is the role of the international financial organizations, such as the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank. Critics argue that these bodies function as tools of global economic control, offering loans to countries in crisis in exchange for requirements that weaken national sovereignty, such as cuts to social programs, large-scale privatizations, and unrestricted openness to foreign investment. Financial crises in this context are seen as opportunities for power expansion. The Great Depression of 1929, the Asian crisis of 1997, and the global crisis of 2008 are often cited as examples of how economic collapses, intentional or not, result in the concentration of wealth. Investors linked to the financial elite take advantage of these moments to acquire companies, land, and strategic assets at far below normal values, further strengthening their dominance. Beyond the economic aspect, there is also control over technological innovation. Large financial conglomerates are often the main investors in technology, biotechnology, and energy companies. By controlling capital, they control the pace and direction of innovations, deciding which advances reach the public and which remain restricted or shelved. This means that the elite not only manages the present economy, but also shapes the future. Supporters of this theory claim that by keeping governments in debt, populations economically dependent, and strategic sectors under control, the financial elite functions as the backbone of the so-called New World Order. And even when names and faces change, real power remains in the same hands, invisible to most yet present in virtually every decision that shapes the modern world. Technological advancement, sold to the public as a synonym for progress and convenience, is seen by many conspiracy theorists as one of the most efficient tools for total population control. The logic is simple. The more connected and dependent on technology we are, the more data we generate. And the more data is collected, the more predictable and manipulable human behavior becomes. Within this narrative, the Illuminati and similar secret societies are believed to have a direct role in the expansion and steering of technologies aimed at global-scale surveillance. The most obvious example is digital tracking. Every click, every search, every online transaction leaves a trail that can be analyzed to identify preferences, habits, vulnerabilities, and social networks. Technology companies, which officially collect this data to improve the user experience, are often accused of sharing it with governments, intelligence services, and even corporations linked to the global elite. Social media platforms, search engines, and communication apps thus become a massive repository of personal information, capable of building detailed psychological profiles of billions of people. The concept of mass surveillance goes beyond the digital environment. Facial recognition cameras in streets and public buildings, monitoring drones, high-resolution satellites, and even voice sensors in home devices are all pieces of a continuous observation network. In some cities, social credit systems are already implemented, assigning scores to citizens based on their behavior, restricting access to services and opportunities for those who do not align with pre-established standards. Another central point is artificial intelligence. Algorithms capable of processing massive amounts of data can not only predict behavior, but also influence it through personalized recommendations, manipulation of news feeds, and even selective censorship of content. The power of these systems lies in their ability to operate without the user's awareness, creating a filtered reality that shapes perceptions and opinions. Technology also expands into the field of biometrics and biological control. Fingerprints, iris scans, voice recognition, and even genetic mapping are increasingly required to access services and devices. Although presented as security measures, this data forms a permanent personal file that can be accessed or manipulated by those who control the networks. In a more extreme scenario, conspiracy theorists point to implantable microchip projects, which would function not only as identification, but also as a digital wallet and real-time tracker. Finally, there is the issue of sound technological dependence. As essential services, such as banking, transportation, communication, and even healthcare, become fully digitized, the possibility of excluding or blocking an individual through administrative or political decision becomes real. Control would not necessarily come through force, but through the simple denial of access, leaving the citizen unable to function within the system. For those who believe in this theory, mass surveillance is not just a byproduct of the digital age, but a calculated step in a larger plan. Every technological advance, every new convenience tool, would carry with it an invisible counterpart, another link in the chain that ties the global population to a network of total control, silent and almost impossible to break. Among all the elements surrounding secret societies, few evoke as much fascination and unease as reports of ceremonies and rituals conducted far from the public eye. For an outside observer, these practices may seem like harmless symbolic performances, but for those who believe in conspiracy theories, they are more than mere traditions. They would be instruments to strengthen internal bonds, enforce submission to hierarchy, and even demonstrate power and loyalty to a hidden agenda. Historically, orders such as the Illuminati, Freemasonry, and more obscure groups have incorporated elaborate initiation rituals that serve as strict filters to select only those deemed worthy to advance. These ceremonies often include oaths of silence and loyalty that, according to reports, carry symbolic consequences or even threats of retaliation if the initiate breaks the group's trust. The intention is clear: to create such a strong psychological pact that the very idea of betraying the organization becomes unthinkable. A frequent element in these rituals is the use of specific symbols and objects: swords, torches, ancient books, ceremonial robes, and insignia that refer to mystical or religious traditions. The environment is usually designed to intensify the psychological impact. Controlled lighting, solemn music, or rhythmic sounds and architectural spaces that reinforce the feeling of mystery and reverence. In societies such as the Bohemian Grove, for example, there are reports of rituals like the cremation of care, where a symbolic figure is burned in front of a giant owl statue, representing the release of worldly concerns so that strategic decisions can be made without moral constraints. Although the official claim is that it is mere theater, the presence of high-ranking political and business figures at these ceremonies fuels suspicions that there is more at stake than it appears. In the case of orders with occultist influences, such as the Ordo Templi Orientis, led in part by figures like Aleister Crowley, sexual rituals and ceremonial magic practices are central to their philosophy. Surrounded by esoteric symbolism, these activities are interpreted by theorists as ways to channel energy and reinforce the spiritual bond among members, and possibly as mechanisms for internal blackmail. Another debated aspect is the presence of rites of passage that allegedly involve simulations of death and rebirth, marking the transition from one hierarchical degree to another. These enactments are intended to kill the initiate's former identity and rebuild them according to the order's values and worldview. In a psychological sense, this creates a symbolic break with the previous life, making the member even more loyal to the group. For skeptics, these rituals are nothing more than chains of tradition, with no practical meaning beyond strengthening group identity. For those who believe in the theories, however, they are essential pieces of a broader mechanism, where theatricality serves to mask real objectives, whether spiritual, political, or aimed at domination. The fact that many of these ceremonies are impenetrable to non-members only reinforces the veil of mystery and fuels their persistence as one of the most enduring topics in investigations into secret societies. Throughout history, art and entertainment have always played a central role in shaping cultural values, preserving narratives, and transmitting messages. However, within the theories surrounding the Illuminati and other secret societies, these fields are not merely means of expression. They are seen as carefully crafted tools used to shape collective thought and reinforce ideological and symbolic agendas that serve global control. The starting point of this view is simple. The public absorbs cultural content with far less resistance than direct political discourse. A song, a film, a work of art, or a television series can insert ideas, symbols, and concepts almost imperceptibly, evoking emotions and associations that become imprinted in the subconscious. When these messages are repeated over time, they create mental patterns that influence perceptions and behaviors. In the music industry, there have been allegations for decades that the recording business is deeply connected to hidden symbols and codes. Music videos from major artists often display images of isolated eyes, triangles, references to pyramids, specific hand gestures, and color combinations loaded with esoteric meaning. For theorists, this is no coincidence. It would be a way to keep Illuminati symbolism in the spotlight while initiating the public into an aesthetic that normalizes its presence. Cinema, with its global reach, is another powerful vehicle. Big-budget films often feature plots involving global conspiracies, secret societies, government manipulation, and technological control. For some, this is mere fiction. For others, it is a process called program desensitization, in which themes considered radical or disturbing are introduced in fictional narratives to reduce public resistance when faced with similar situations in real life. The same applies to visual arts and fashion. Advertising campaigns, editorials, and fashion shows by major brands often incorporate elements such as masks, distorted religious symbolism, references to ancient cults, and messages written in visual codes. Even when disguised as artistic concepts, these elements are interpreted by conspiracy theorists as another layer of effort to saturate the cultural environment with the aesthetics and values of these societies. Video games and streaming platforms also enter this debate. Interactive stories, virtual worlds, and immersive experiences are ideal opportunities to insert narratives and symbols, especially for a young and highly connected audience. The repetition of these elements across multiple media creates what some call a symbolic ecosystem, where influence becomes constant and omnipresent. Critics of this interpretation argue that the presence of such symbols results from the recycling of historical references and the search for visual impact, not from a centralized conspiracy. However, for the theory's defenders, the consistency in repetition, the global reach, and the link between major entertainment companies and circles of power are proof that the arts and culture not only reflect society, they are also deliberately shaped to guide it in specific directions, often without the public realizing it. Among all the world's institutions, few carry as much mystery and symbolic power as the Vatican. As the seat of the Catholic Church and the center of one of the largest religious organizations in history, it exerts spiritual influence over more than 1 billion faithful, while also possessing vast wealth, diplomatic connections, and access to historical information that remains out of the public's reach. It is therefore no surprise that countless conspiracy theories link the Vatican to secret societies and hidden agendas said to shape the fate of humanity. One of the most discussed points is the existence of the Vatican's secret archives, a massive collection of historical documents, correspondence, manuscripts, and official records stretching for kilometers through underground shelves. While the Vatican claims that access is restricted solely for preservation purposes and controlled research, many believe these archives hold secrets capable of rewriting history, evidence of contact with ancient secret societies, information about sacred bloodlines, details of political conspiracies, and even records of supernatural events. The Church's relationship with secret societies is historically ambiguous. On one hand, the institution has condemned and persecuted orders such as Freemasonry, deeming them incompatible with Catholic doctrine. On the other hand, there are reports and theories suggesting that groups like the Knights of Malta and even internal factions within the Church operate with dynamics similar to secret societies, using oaths of loyalty, rigid hierarchies, and international networks of influence. Some narratives claim that over the centuries, the Vatican has maintained discreet alliances with occult societies to preserve or expand its power. This would include pacts with monarchies, support for political operations, and even alleged participation in symbolic rituals combining Christian and esoteric elements. Opus Dei, for example, although officially recognized as a personal prelature of the Church, is often cited in theories as an order working behind the scenes to influence political and economic decisions in various countries. Another recurring theme is the Vatican's role in major historical events. From the Inquisition to indirect involvement in world conflicts, there are theories that the institution acted not only as a spiritual guardian, but also as a strategic player on the global chessboard. Its power to intervene in crises, mediate agreements, and influence world leaders is seen as proof that the Church possesses a network of contacts and information rivaling that of any intelligence service. For supporters of these theories, the Vatican is not merely a religious entity, but a hybrid center of power, spiritual, political, and economic, capable of interacting with other secret societies in pursuit of common goals. For skeptics, however, most of these claims arise from a combination of the institution's naturally reserved nature and the human tendency to associate mystery with conspiracy. Either way, the intersection of faith, power, and secrecy makes the Vatican one of the most frequently mentioned actors when it comes to the alleged hidden network controlling the world. And for those who believe in the existence of such a global mechanism, it would not be just a privileged observer, but an essential piece in the machinery that keeps control in the hands of a few. Throughout the centuries, few moments in the narratives about secret societies are as impactful as those in which alleged members or insiders decide to speak out. Leaks and whistleblowing, whether real or alleged, have always fueled public imagination and reinforced the belief that there are indeed invisible forces operating behind the scenes of power. These episodes, whether in the form of documents, interviews, or confessions, are treated by conspiracy theorists as rare windows into a world that is normally inaccessible. One of the most emblematic cases dates back to the official banning of the Bavarian Illuminati in 1784. At the time, authorities seized documents detailing internal correspondence, expansion plans, and strategies for infiltrating political and religious institutions. While many historians view these records as reflections of a philosophical movement rather than evidence of a global conspiracy, believers consider them proof that the order possessed organized methods to discreetly and enduringly influence society. In the 20th century, cases emerged such as the so-called Pike Memorandum, attributed to Albert Pike, an influential figure in American Freemasonry. This document, whose authenticity is widely contested, outlines an alleged plan for 3 world wars intended to reshape the global order and pave the way for a centralized government. Even without proof, the detailed description of events that, according to theory supporters, coincided with later historical developments keeps this text alive in conspiracy discussions. Another famous episode involves the accusations made by former members of Skull and Bones and Bohemian Grove, who claim to have witnessed strange rituals and discussions of long-term political strategies among elite members. Undercover journalists have also claimed to have captured images and audio recordings of symbolic ceremonies in these places, reinforcing the perception that these societies maintain secret traditions with meanings that go far beyond mere entertainment. In the digital age, leaks have taken on a new dimension. Cases such as Edward Snowden's revealed mass surveillance systems operated by government agencies, which, for many, confirm the existence of a global data collection network, something that aligns perfectly with the conspiratorial view of population control. While there is no direct evidence linking these operations to specific secret societies, the very fact that such a vast system operates clandestinely fuels suspicion. There are also accounts from individuals who claim to have escaped from modern occult orders, describing everything from rituals to strategies for manipulating political and economic leaders. In many cases, these individuals vanish from the public eye after their statements, which for theory supporters is interpreted as an attempt at silencing. For skeptics, much of this leaked information lacks verifiable evidence and is fueled by exaggerated interpretations or even deliberate disinformation. However, for believers, each leak, even if isolated or incomplete, is a piece of a much larger puzzle that can only be understood when all fragmented information is assembled. The impact of these episodes is profound. They not only reinforce the convictions of those who already believe in the existence of secret societies, but also plant doubts in previously skeptical minds. After all, if some of these revelations are later confirmed, how many other truths still remain locked behind closed doors? Despite their popularity and the fascination they hold over the collective imagination, theories involving the Illuminati and secret societies face harsh criticism from historians, social scientists, investigative journalists, and professional skeptics. For these critics, most allegations lack concrete evidence, being built on coincidences, forced interpretations, and information taken out of context. They argue that, in order to understand how power works, one must look at real political and economic structures rather than hidden entities that leave no verifiable traces. A recurring argument is that the world is far too chaotic to be controlled by a single group. Wars, economic crises, and technological advances arise from complex interactions between nations, corporations, and individuals, making it unlikely that all these events are planned and executed by a centralized elite. Even in exclusive meetings and international forums, such as the World Economic Forum, there is a diversity of interests and agendas that often come into conflict. Another point raised is the human tendency to seek patterns. The human brain is programmed to identify connections and narratives, even where none exist, a phenomenon known as cognitive pareidolia. Thus, repeated symbols, recurring numbers, and historical coincidences can be given exaggerated interpretations simply because people are predisposed to find hidden meaning. Critics also argue that the vision of an absolute invisible power can have dangerous consequences. By blaming a secret entity for all the world's problems, there is a risk of oversimplifying complex issues, diverting attention from concrete responsibilities, and in some cases, fueling prejudice and extremist theories. History shows that, in times of crisis, belief in global conspiracies has been used to justify persecution and authoritarian policies. In the academic field, most researchers agree that secret societies have indeed existed and still exist, but they differ on the extent of their influence. Orders such as the Bavarian Illuminati were historically documented movements, but with limited duration and restricted influence. Organizations such as Freemasonry, although widespread, have stated objectives that do not match the idea of a secret world government. For skeptics, much of the so-called evidence used by conspiracy theorists is based on secondary sources, unverified testimonies, or materials impossible to authenticate. Documents such as the Pike Memorandum, or alleged global domination plans do not withstand rigorous historical analysis. Furthermore, the repetition of these stories in books, films, and videos ends up reinforcing the myth, creating a sense of truth through familiarity, the so-called illusory truth effect. Even so, the most staunch critics admit that secrecy and the concentration of power are ingredients that inevitably generate suspicion. When high-impact political, economic, and military decisions are made behind closed doors, the lack of transparency creates the perfect ground for conspiracy narratives to flourish. It is in this nebulous space, between proven facts and unverified interpretations, that the myth of secret societies continues to grow. The influence of the myth of the Illuminati and secret societies is not limited to the field of conspiracy theories. It has long since spilled over into popular culture, becoming a recurring element in music, films, TV series, comics, video games, and even fashion. Even those who have never studied the subject in depth recognize the symbols, expressions, and references associated with these organizations. This phenomenon is not only a reflection of public curiosity, but also a self-perpetuating cycle. The more pop culture explores the topic, the more it takes root in the collective imagination, and the more it takes root, the more it is exploited by pop culture. In music, major industry names have been accused of inserting symbolism linked to the Illuminati in music videos, performances, and album covers. Isolated eyes, pyramids, hand gestures forming triangles, and references to occultist figures frequently appear, especially in genres like pop, rap, and R&B. For believers in these theories, this exposure is part of an agenda to normalize and even glamorize the symbols of these societies. For critics, however, it is merely a marketing strategy, taking advantage of controversy to generate engagement and virality. Cinema has also played a fundamental role in popularizing the theme. Films such as Eyes Wide Shut, The Da Vinci Code, Angels and Demons, and countless political thrillers explore plots involving secret societies, rituals, global conspiracies, and the concept of a shadow government. In many cases, narratives mix real historical elements with fiction, creating fertile ground for audiences to accept the possibility that such organizations exist and operate behind the scenes of the real world. TV series, in turn, have increasingly used the format of ongoing investigation and conspiracy, fueling debates among fans about what is real and what is fiction. Productions that present recurring symbols or storylines involving mysterious elites end up being analyzed frame by viewers searching for hidden messages. In the world of comics and video games, the figure of the secret society is equally popular. Games like Assassin's Creed are directly based on the idea of a centuries-old struggle between secret orders for world control, blending historical events with fictional narratives. The success of these works reinforces the public's familiarity with conspiratorial concepts and symbols, often without them realizing how much they are internalizing this iconography. In fashion and advertising, elements tied to the imagery of secret societies appear in campaigns and collections, whether through the use of pyramids, eyes, compasses, or colors associated with occult rituals. Although designers and creative directors claim aesthetic inspiration, the result is the constant insertion of these symbols into everyday life, which, according to theorists, helps reinforce their presence in the collective consciousness. The cultural impact is so strong that the term Illuminati has become almost a brand, used to create mystery, draw attention, and provoke discussion. For some, this omnipresence is proof that the idea has become part of a deliberate strategy to keep the narrative alive and thus conceal or trivialize the truth. For others, it is simply another example of how intriguing topics find space and thrive in the entertainment industry. If much of the narratives about the Illuminati and secret societies already seem improbable to the general public, there is an even more radical segment, that of extreme theories. These versions expand the scope of the supposed conspiracies to dimensions that go beyond politics, economics, and culture, reaching claims of extraterrestrial interventions, secret genetic experiments, and direct manipulation of human evolution. Although these allegations are seen by many as absurd, they exert a strong fascination over certain groups and feed on the lack of transparency in strategic areas of science and technology. One of the most well-known is the theory of an alliance with alien entities. According to this view, Members of secret societies have maintained direct contact with extraterrestrial civilizations for decades, or even centuries, exchanging advanced technology for resources and influence over humanity. Accounts from alleged ex-military personnel and employees of ultra-secret projects speak of shared underground bases and joint experiments, especially in areas such as zero-point energy, anti-gravity propulsion, and genetic manipulation. Another extreme narrative involves the idea of hybrid bloodlines, in which the global elite descended from ancient monarchs supposedly has DNA altered through alien influence or by ancient advanced civilizations. For supporters of this hypothesis, this would explain the perpetuation of power in the hands of a few families and the alleged ability of these lineages to maintain geopolitical dominance for centuries. There is also the theory that secret societies control projects of climate and geological manipulation, using technologies such as HAARP, High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, or similar systems to cause earthquakes, hurricanes, and droughts for strategic purposes. According to believers, these disasters would be used to justify humanitarian interventions, displace populations, and reshape entire regions according to specific interests. At an even more unsettling level, there is the narrative of absolute mind control programs in which social engineering techniques are combined with electronic implants, psychotropic drugs, and subliminal stimuli to shape the personality and memories of key individuals. It is alleged that public figures and world leaders have been programmed to act according to directives defined by a central, invisible power structure. These extreme theories, although lacking verifiable evidence, find fertile ground to spread in online forums, alternative media channels, and independent publications. Their appeal lies in the fact that, by mixing real elements, such as secret military programs, little-known scientific advances, and historical coincidences, with extraordinary claims, they create a cohesive and engaging narrative for those already predisposed to believe. For skeptics, this type of theory represents the point where speculation surpasses any plausibility, diverting serious debate about secret societies and weakening legitimate investigations. But for those who perceive a pattern in the sequence of global events, these more radical hypotheses are not only possible, but would be the missing piece to explain seemingly disconnected phenomena. Looking toward the future, the main question is not whether secret societies will continue to exist, but how they will adapt to new political, technological, and social scenarios. If we accept the premise that groups such as the Illuminati or similar networks have operated in the shadows for centuries, it is logical to imagine that their survival depends on a unique ability to transform according to changes in the visible world. The first trend pointed out by many theorists is the definitive migration to the digital space. The information age has brought new means of communication and coordination that eliminate the need for physical meetings, making it much more difficult to track internal activities. Encrypted platforms, private networks, and immersive virtual environments would allow meetings and rituals to be held in a way that is almost impossible to intercept. This virtualization of secrecy expands global reach and reduces the risks of exposure. Another possible evolution lies in the use of artificial intelligence as a strategic tool. Systems capable of analyzing immense volumes of data in real time would allow predicting economic movements, detecting emerging political trends, and manipulating narratives before they even gain traction. This would represent a qualitative leap in information control, enabling not only reaction to events, but also proactive shaping of them. In the economic field, it is speculated that secret societies will continue advancing toward financial centralization, now through centrally controlled digital currencies, possibly linked to biometric identities. This model would allow monitoring and restricting transactions, reinforcing the idea of a closed economic system where full participation would depend on compliance with rules established by the elite. Cultural control also tends to become more subtle and personalized. Instead of universal messages spread to everyone, technological advances will allow the creation of narratives individually tailored for each citizen, based on their psychological and behavioral profile. This degree of personalization would make manipulation almost invisible, as the narrative would always seem organic and spontaneous to the person receiving it. There is also the matter of integration with new global agendas. such as the climate crisis, space exploration, and biotechnology. For some theorists, these fields offer ideal opportunities to expand the reach of decisions made far from the public eye. Geoengineering projects, extraterrestrial colonies, and advances in genetic editing could be used both for the benefit of humanity and to consolidate a centralized model of power. Finally, there is the possibility that, in the future, secret societies will operate in a hybrid form, combining traditional structures with more fluid and decentralized networks. This would make it harder to identify a single core of power, spreading decisions and responsibilities among multiple interconnected groups that share long-term goals. For skeptics, the future of secret societies is irrelevant, as many may have already lost real influence, surviving only as legends and cultural symbols. But for those who believe, the future will not only ensure their survival, but will allow them to reach a level of control never before seen, where secrecy will no longer exist solely in the shadows, but will be integrated into the very structure of everyday reality, so naturally that most will never realize they are being guided.